Welcome back, everybody. Today we will be painting up a WizKids Fomorian giant and going over how to paint a sort of purple, pretty bruisey skin tone, slightly sickly skin tone. So let's just jump into it. We are going to start out and focus on painting the skin on this big guy, and there is a lot of skin. This guy's actually way too big to be a Fomorian giant, so going to be taking a little bit more artistic license and paint him up as kind of a more special character giant. So we are painting a purple skin tone, and for that we're using Vallejo model color Violet. To give it a little bit more warmth and lighten up a bit, we've added heavy warm gray, and then to darken it for this shade layer, some Camo black brown. And we're using that instead of black because black is going to dull our color a little bit too much. Next layer, keeping things simple, just adding more of the heavy warm gray to our mix and applying this paint in layers. We are not applying as many layers as normal with this project. Normally I prefer the 2 shade coats, base coat, and about 3 or 4 highlights, but due to the scale of this figure, we don't need to apply that many layers. Also, we're going to concentrate more on color variation than simply highlights and shadows. For our next highlight, mixing in some game color heavy skin tone, and that's going to give us a bit more of a human look, and it's also going to add a bit more color variation to our big giant here. Also, it's going to help to tie in the purple skin a little bit more to the other more fleshy areas that we're going to paint later. Currently using a 4-color mix, so that's a little bit on the complicated side, and we don't want to keep adding more and more paint to it and make it really complicated. So for our final highlight, I can match our highlight color what we need by mixing violet and pale flesh, and not have to worry about adding additional colors to the previous mix. As always with the layering method, we have thin layers of paint. How much to thin them is completely up to you. The thinner, the better. The thicker, the quicker. And of course, if you choose, you could simply dry brush everything. It won't look as good, but it'll get done really quick, and if that's your preferred method, I am good with it. Now for the fun stuff, we want to add some color variations. Fomorian Giant is supposed to be rather mutated, so on the mutated area up top, we're going to apply some military green. We are applying this with the layering method, so we want to use transparent layers of paints, just like adding on a highlight, except for we are transitioning from purple to green here. And we're not trying to cover up the green, we're not trying to cover up the purple. I'm trying to tint the purple with the green. So we have somewhat of a soft transition from purple, the regular skin areas, to the more mutated green areas. To highlight our military green, adding in some pale flesh. Remember, we added pale flesh to our violet for our final highlight on the purple skin areas, so adding it here helps to give somewhat of the same skin tone tint to both areas. Also, I am concentrating the highlights on all the lumpy areas, decided to keep them as regular skin essentially, and rather than disgusting pimples or any other unmentionable things, but you could paint them a different color if you wish. If you're familiar with D&D lore, you can tell that kind of going a little bit with artistic license on this project with the Fomorian Giant. They're supposed to be just purple, very plain purple skin. but added the green for the sickly areas, but I still wanted to add a little bit more to break up all that purple skin, so decided to add a bit more human flesh areas. Not everywhere, I kind of wanted to do it in patches, so a little bit on the side of the face, a little bit on the other side of the stomach, you know, one hand, one knee, what have you. And to do that, starting off with Rose Brown, which is a regular skin tone color that I sometimes use. It's a little bit too warm, a little bit too pink for most skin tones, but after putting that down, then we begin to really working in the beige red, which is another skin tone color I often use. And you can see we are applying it very similar how we did the green. We're not trying to completely cover up all the purple, but more like tint it. And again, working in patches here. So doing just one side of the chest, one side of the face, and a few other areas. Once that was done, I went back with a slightly thicker beige red and just started adding some dots to those more human areas. And that's going to give us a little bit of texture, make the skin look a little bit more interesting. So not everything is very smooth and relatively clean, but just gives it a little bit of extra spice. Once that is done, we can apply our final highlight, beige red mixed with pale flesh. Again, using pale flesh, so we tied in all three areas with the final highlight being a mixture of pale flesh. Also important to note that this final highlight is going over all the little dots that we put down, and so that's going to help to blend them into the skin. By putting this final highlight on top of them, it's going to look like they are a part of the skin rather than just resting on top of the skin. So we have some human skin areas placed, but it needs a little bit of warmth. So adding some burnt red around the recessed areas. So this is going to add a little bit of warmth to the human skin. Also gives the impression that the skin is damaged. You know, maybe this is what he was originally before he hulked out into a giant. So a little blood loss there, perhaps, and a little bit of color to the skin tone as well. And then for the purple skin areas, remember we didn't do a whole lot of shading at the beginning. So here's where we're going to tint those shade areas with a mix of violet red and violet. Again, adding a little bit of red to the skin tone, much like we did with the more pink human flesh areas. So the red is helping to tie in the recessed colors of all the skin areas, much like the pale flesh helped to tie in all the highlights. Eyeball time. A Fomorian giant is supposed to have a big nasty yellow eye. So started off with an undercoat of Scrofulous brown, which is a nice burnt orange in the game color range. And then over that applying flat yellow and then a mixture of flat yellow and bone white. And trying to kind of stipple in the eye to make it look a little bit more messed up rather than a smooth eyeball. He's having problems with his eyes as well as his skin. And then simply a slit of black for the pupil. By the way, when you're painting eyes, if you have problems using very tiny brushes and the paint drying before you actually get to put it on a miniature because of the size of the brush, try adding a little bit of glaze medium to your paint mixture. It'll slow down the dry time and give you enough time to paint that pupil. And then we just finish off with a little wash of gory red around the outside because he probably doesn't get a whole lot of sleep. And there is our Fomorian Giant with just a little bit of artistic flair. I hope you can see by adding some color variation to this, what is just a giant canvas of skin, we can make the miniature look a whole lot more interesting. We could have just painted it purple and been done with it, but adding the green there, some heavier purple areas, the more human skin tone, it makes the whole miniature look a lot more interesting. And I think you could apply this easily to ghouls or undead or just bruised skin, maybe Nurgle. Just don't paint it all one color. Add some variety to your skin jobs. That's it. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Blake Fist Crunch.
Buff Hardback.
Bob Johnson.